Hello, this is BoF Live. I'm Tim Blanks. Today we're talking to Charles Jeffrey, and we are in mid-lockdown or major lockdown. We don't know if it's mid-lockdown. We don't know really where this is all going to go. So Charles, where are you, and what are you doing?
I'm currently in my partner's apartment. I've actually moved into his place because he has more space. So basically I'm in Hackney Downs, like just a stone's throw away from the station. So I've sort of accommodated his living room, and we've got like a workspace that we both sort of share, because he does fashion as well. So he's sort of like making corsets in the background. Don't know if you can see.
Over there. No,
just there.
I can't see.
It's sort of like there.
There he is. Okay, somewhere over off screen. How is your day different now?
I guess it's a lot more routined, actually. I guess because I have to kind of like use that routine for my own sanity. So I kind of start my day a lot earlier than I used to. I get up at like 6:30 now, and then I try and do some sort of exercise in the morning, whether that's running or doing some MetaFit class. That's like an online thing that you can do, which is very interesting. And then it's
What's
usually
that word?
MetaFit. MetaFit.
Oh, MetaFit. I thought it was metaphysic, which is something else altogether. Okay, MetaFit. Okay.
It's using crystals. No,
No,
but yeah, it's very much more routine, and you know, it's a 10 till 6 day, and it's very much, you know, a lot of communications back and forth with my team, Zoom calls like this one. I don't know, it feels kind of I feel like I've really normalized it straight away. It's weird.
So how many people in your team are you in constant touch with?
So we're now, including myself, we're a team of 4. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, 5. And we'll do meetings with me and my core team, so Naomi and Sam. And then I'll have meetings with my designer, Daniel, my trainee designer. And then we'll do meetings with all of us, which include my other colleague, Chris, who heads up sourcing with fabrics and assists Naomi in production. So we'll do them in kind of, you know, different kind of setups. So sometimes we'll do.
And what are you actually working on altogether?
Well, it was a show. It was a collection. We still are kind of working towards that, but the sort of drops for it have sort of like staggered now. So obviously the June shows have been cancelled, and there's talk of something happening in September. So we've kind of got this thing called like an emergency collection, which is a very much more reduced collection of around 50 pieces, which is around half of what we usually do. And we're just working towards that. They're just like, you know, pieces that the buyers really trust, or things that we know are, you know, have got good turnaround and good good margins, sorry. So yeah, we're just working towards that, but it's again weird. I mean, I'm still doing the same amount of work, but it's just not as intense, if that makes sense. It's not like to a time scale.
It sounds like it's more pragmatic, though, in a way. What do you anticipate on the other side of this? That you will need to have sort of signature pieces that people feel comfortable with, that people are familiar with. Do you think familiarity is going to be an important thing, rather than, you know, the shock of the new that you kind of specialize in the rest of the time?
Yeah, I think that's the thing I've been sort of toying between, is like you know, what feels right, because obviously, you know, you always think, well, people want to sort of dream and escape and feel sort of you know, inspired by things in times of crisis, but then at the same time you have this kind of like weird moral feeling where you're like, oh, I don't want to become too sort of chauvinistic or sort of bombastic in times like this. So it's like the idea of something being familiar. I mean, even things like posting things online about sales, or like, oh, we've got this new collection. It's sort of this weird double thinking that you have to have. It's like, do people want to see that? Do people want to buy things? Don't know. It's really weird time.
Well, this does you know, I think this is going to be the question that people, one of the questions that people have to cope with is, and I find myself talking quite a lot about it with people, is it escapism or engagement that's going to be more important for the immediate future of fashion when this is over. Bearing in mind that there's going to be a lot of attrition. I think that it's going to be very, very hard for a lot of people to come back from this. I mean, that's the brutal reality. What's your feeling about that?
Well, I think that in this time, it's very much about sort of like connecting with the customer or the follower or the fan of the work that you're doing, and just being authentic to them. And I think being very personal. Like, I think beforehand, I was very much about sort of building the brand and it being like sort of Loverboy, and trying to put that into more of a kind of global context, so it's not so individual, so that there's more scope for people to sort of engage with it. But now it sort of feels the complete opposite. Like, I feel more inclined to put myself on the forefront and be like, this is me, I'm Charles Jeffrey, and this is my brand Loverboy, and like, this is me, and this is what I'm about, and I'm here, and I want to get to know you, and I guess put myself out there in that way. And I think that there's something, really important about that. I feel like it's that thing of people liking sort of individual pieces or something that's been hand touched, sort of felt by the designer. And I don't know, I think something of feeling a lot more personal is what's going to happen.
So intimate then.
Intimacy, yeah, for sure.
I mean, there's an irony in the fact that the collection that you were in the middle of shipping was your collection where you actually really did reach out to the world and really were consciously thinking of broadening your frame of reference, so that you felt you had a very clear customer, say, that you had acquired through Matches Fashion, that you were talking to, as well as having the cultists. And this was going to be your address to the world. And ironically, of course, it's all been kind of brought right into a kind of reduced to a sort of essence.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about how we were sort of distributing the collection after the sales season, like looking at all of the different pieces, there was a really large range of people buying from all those different sort of camps. There was that Matches customer who was buying just the beautifully cut kilt dresses, and then there was a customer, the Dover Street customer, who was buying all of the embroidery crazy puffer pieces and the colorful pieces. And I think that it's now we're talking about releasing the collection, and all the focus is now doing it on our e-commerce, so that it's our own personal platform. And again, that I think it goes back to the idea of being a bit more intimate. Like, we can control how those garments are shot and how they're presented. And I think it's whether it's going to be in line with the show or has a different treatment to it on the website. It's whether we shoot it in a more sort of open-minded way. I don't know. It's interesting now that it's changed to that.
I mean, in an ideal world, what would you hope people wanted from you when we get to the other side?
I mean, I hope people want a party. I hope people want to have some fun. I think a lot of people are feeling this sort of itch now, like they're sort of, they want, I mean, I know that a lot of people are wanting to go dancing. I know a lot of people are wanting to sort of like mingle and be around people. And I don't know, I mean, obviously it would be interesting to do a show that's sort of reflective on my own personal experience and what those metaphors could be drawn from visually in the show. Whether I do something sort of dark or sort of, reflective, or whether it's something that is a shining light through it all. I don't know. It's something I guess I'll sort of catch on to closer to the time. But then it's also something that I'm overthinking all the time as well. I don't know. Sometimes I just want to put it to rest and give it in for another couple of months, and then just like ignite it when it's ready, so it has a bit more of a sort of standing to it.
I mean, I think it's so interesting for you, because your last show, well, all your shows, but the last show, what I saw in that show was this dialogue between the very ancient. There was Simon Costin's very spooky old druidic tree hanging at the end, looming at the end of the catwalk, decorated with CDs. Modern touch. And then there was that whole dance element in the show that got progressively more and more intense, and I felt it ended in complete despair. I felt it was like a dance of death. And you know, again, in this multitude of ironies that we're confronting with this crisis, that was kind of ironic that you see, you've always been able to see a darkness in there's always been a darkness in what you do. There's always been this kind of sense of ritual and like pagan ritual, and then then also this relationship with nature that you've explored through all the elements of the collection, not just the clothing, the hair, the makeup, but the set, and you have a dance element, and it's always been very, very strong. And right now we're in a situation where we're confronting the implacability of nature, that actually we are very puny in the face of nature's implacable might. Do you feel, I'm curious as to whether you feel, there's anything in you that feels this was inevitable, that this was, you talked about the road that the world was on. You talked about, you made some very dramatic statements about you know, the young people inheriting a broken world from previous generations. I wonder what your take on this is right now, if you have a sort of conceptual view of it.
Well, I was thinking about that earlier, and you know, just the sort of thinking that I had before we were even designing the collection, like how Menju, the show itself, was like it was a sort of sacrifice. It was a vision of a future. We sacrificed somebody to this tree, you know, in reference to these sort of pagan rituals. And I was also really inspired by this film that was called Arcadia by Paul Wright, which was sort of this archival footage which sort of showed the journey between, you know, the beauty and brutality of man's relationship with nature. It was all this kind of archival footage of, you know, farmers and druids and, you know, people practicing all of these sort of sacrifices and, well, not sacrifices, sort of weird sort of joyous dances and magic, practicing magic. And, you know, it really got me to thinking, you know, there's this weird sort of energy right now, people sort of like confronting each other about, oh, you know, you're not looking after the planet enough, or you're not looking after the planet enough. And no one's really kind of trying to do or go back to some of these old ancient ways. And I thought, well, maybe it's about kind of looking back and, you know, I don't know, it was kind of eerie as well. I was thinking, we launched our ecom on Valentine's Day and Loverboy.net. And we kind of designed this website that was very in line with my drawings and all of my kind of little creatures that I designed. And the way that it kind of looks, it almost looks a bit viral. Like it looks like when you're scrolling up, it's all these kind of like things sort of attacking the sort of format of the website. And I thought that was kind of eerie. I was like, God, that looks a little bit like, you know, all of the sort of illustrations that you're seeing on Sky News, like how it's spreading and all of that. And I was like, oh, am I like some sort of weirdly, like, am I predicting the future or something? I don't know. But I was thinking about this idea of like Gaia and how coronavirus is almost like this sort of like silent whisper from her. Like it's like a little whisper of what could happen.
Tell us who Gaia is.
Well, Gaia is like, you know, the sort of maternal metaphor for the world, for Earth, like Mother Gaia. I don't necessarily know the complete history of where she came from. I think it's Aztecs or...
Yeah, James Lovelock's theory that the Earth, the entire planet, is a living organism.
I mean, it does feel valid as an idea. You know, it's just like a subtle whisper. And yet, you know, when you hear about things like all of these sort of pandemics in history, and when you're watching a sort of like 2-minute clip on it on like Watch Mojo or something, you know, it's talking about all the different pandemics. You're like, oh, that was shit that happened. But then there's something else moves on. Oh, that was shit that happened. But, you know, you sort of compartmentalize it to like those 2 minutes in which it's described. And like, I feel like coronavirus to a certain extent, you know, 50 years from now is going to be compartmentalized to like 1 minute. And it's like, you know, for me, it's like almost going to be, it's going to be remembered as a sort of like prompt from Gaia to be like, right, you're not doing enough. I'm just going to like launch this. I know that the gravitas of it is incredibly huge. but it does feel like this sort of subtle reminder for us to all sort of reset and to look at ourselves and to sort of like be a bit more mindful, I think.
I think it's because absolutely nobody has been through this. I mean, maybe the man who turned 112 the other day had a memory of the Spanish flu in 1918, but really nobody. This is unprecedented. People keep using the word unprecedented, and it really is. It fascinates me that it unites my 91-year-old mother, my 8-year-old nephew, and me. We are in the same boat with this. And so you're right, 50 years, you have a historical perspective on this. You can go back through history and look at pandemics, and the Renaissance came out of the Black Death. But it was a hideous transformation. And
the boils
transformation, to need such a catastrophe to create this cultural rebirth. Where does fashion fit into that, though?
Well, I think it's definitely the thing with coronavirus is it's bringing us all together, right? So it's making us, feel in line with everybody else, and it's I don't know. I think it might bring this sort of hierarchy down a little bit and make everybody sort of view everybody in the same light. Because I know this whole idea of doing like these big, gargantuan shows straight after this, I'm not sure if that's going to feel valid anymore. And I would be really curious to see, like, designers who have been known to do these like huge big shows, how they all, if they're going to be a lot more humbler, or what they're going to be saying alongside, smaller designers like myself. I mean, I know I do like big shows, and there's a part of me that does want to do something that is sort of celebratory, but something that feels kind of humble and is maybe not pushing product as an agenda, but more about an idea. I mean, I feel like it's going to like really break people down to what the core essence of their brands are. What do they have to say other than the product? Is there something else that they have to say that's more about content, or more about morals or art, or what is the kind of core elements of everybody? I think it's almost like it's sort of like burning down all of the it's like the coronavirus is almost like burning down the ozone layer of every brand's planet and getting them right to the core, if that makes sense.
Well, there is a sort of giantism of fashion, and I am curious to see what happens, what people's sense of the appropriate is in the light of this. And then there's also, somebody like you who's always emphasized community, that your shows are a community project in a way. You talked a lot after the last show about local couture and the idea of everything being made locally, or within a reasonable amount of travel, as opposed to this syndrome that's developed in fashion where brands chase the cheapest price, and they'll do something here and something there and something else there all over the world to save 25 cents. The idea of localization to me makes so much sense, because I don't know, when we were talking about this earlier, and I called it villaging, and I don't know whether that's a word that I've read somewhere, but it's something that feels quite rational to me, that you have a dressmaker, a tailor, and a cobbler in your village, like people used to. And I guess it's kind of a fairy tale thing in a way, but is it conceivable that something like that might come out of this crisis?
Well, I think, physically everybody is kind of retreating back to their own homes, whether those homes are, their family homes where they grew up, or, to their own sort of spaces. And, in some ways, I mean, I'm thinking a lot about Matty Bovan and his process, and how he works in his little village in York, and is able to produce all of these fantastic outfits that are just, you wouldn't think would be a product of that sort of small town. Or, I was also thinking, that sort of idea of villaging and localization came from the Royal Academy talks that we did. And I can't remember the name of the designer that was after us. He was a streetwear designer, and he was talking about, you know, people buying different products from different parts of London. Like you would
Oh,
go,
yes, yeah.
you know, and that was getting me thinking about, like, you know, people like Matty and, you know, people in Scotland as well, and all of the sort of industry that's there, that's, you know, being bought up by one or two huge companies just to use themselves. And, you know, it's a shame, because when I first started working, I was using a lot of Scottish mills to make a lot of my stuff, like my tartan and my knitwear. And, you know, as we progressed as a brand, we did have to shift there because they weren't able to fulfill our orders, not because of the quality or the ability to make them, but it was just the sheer size of how we were growing. And I would love to, you know, be able to have all of my products made in Scotland and built there, and, you know, work with shoe companies there and things. And I'm hoping that, you know, maybe with this happening, everyone does have to stay close and have to stay local and have to go back to kind of like engaging with local communities. I mean, even think about like the local shop, like these are heroes of ours right now. And people are not necessarily relying on the supermarkets, they're relying on the small shops. And
yeah, now I read the newspaper this morning, used shops you can walk to.
Yeah.
You know, so people aren't driving. You know, you just make sure it's your local shops that you're relying on during this. But the idea of using local artisans, I mean, it is something that has been coming forward in fashion. The artisanal, the craft, which people have been talking about for a few years now. I think maybe when I was talking to Sam McKnight the other day, I did keep talking about going back, and he said, I don't like the idea of going back. So we have to talk about going forward and using this kind of villaging or localizing idea as the future, and not the idea of it being a return, but actually a way forward. You know, what I like about that is it really dovetails with the human need for a narrative, and people love stories, and it's what you've always done. You've created such complex narratives with your shows. There's always this whole other thing that animates the show. How important do you see that being going forward?
I think it has to continue. I think it would be vital for people to continue storytelling, or to use that as a narrative. I think there's this sort of element of being more personal that comes from, you know, coming up with your own stories and using them as a sort of tool for your own process. I mean, obviously, lots of people have different processes for achieving fashion. I feel like there's a real focus right now on cultural capital and how much references you know, and how can you subvert that and show the symbolism from all of that and bring that together.
What's that mean? What's that mean? Explain that. That sounds really interesting.
What, cultural capital?
No, but the reference, how many references you use, kind of, you mean that gives a richness to what you do?
Well, I think that, well, not for me personally. I think I always struggle.
You do love a library.
You what? Sorry.
You do love a library.
I do love a library. Yeah, I think, but you do get that sort of feeling of, God, is this sort of referenced enough, or does this kind of have enough subversion to it, or am I referencing the right sort of movement here or something? But then I remember saying that before to tutors, and especially Louise, and she was like, it's not about that, it's about the core of who you are and how you bring that forward, because we all will remember references and relate to them in different ways. And so the job of the artist and the designer is just to put something in front of you, and, you know, it's for you to sort of interpret. And I guess in some ways, like, I do get a bit nervous about explaining my work. Like, the scariest thing I find is at the very end of the runway to sort of talk. I mean, thank God for your friendly face, otherwise I'd be like, you know, I'd be terrified. But it is that. But it's like, I do get scared sometimes. I'm like, am I saying the right thing? Am I being as authentic as I'm supposed to be? But then it's like, sometimes you just got to let it happen and just like say what you've got to say. And it's that person's, you know, it's how the person sort of interprets it. But that idea of cultural capital, you know, I think that there's such, there is a big focus of that at the moment in fashion, whereas that idea of storytelling and actually fully bringing forth this kind of narrative and using that as a driving force, I don't know, it definitely still exists, but I wonder if that will be more of a sort of driving force, something that feels a bit more fairy tale, or magical. I don't know.
How does this exist without something like a fashion show, do you think? How are you sort of making, you said you were planning a show, but how do you have a contingency for communicating all of that, communicating that fairy tale, as it were, without the actual physical element of a fashion show?
Yeah, I mean, one of the benefits, I think, of, having a brand like Loverboy is just the sort of history of the content that we put out there. We were never just known for just doing fashion shows. We always did like little films, or even when it was like the club night, it wasn't just like an event page on Facebook. We did like an editorial, we did like a film, we did a set, we had like performances in the club, and like, so it was always lots of different things that I sort of drew my attention to market the brand that was Loverboy. And that still carries on when we're doing shows. I mean, it's got a lot more sort of professional, so we have like a professional filmer, and then we'll have like content that goes out, but we've always done lots of other little bits and worked with other artists to make content that doesn't even relate to the clothing. Like, I love working with this artist called Jenkin Van Zyl. He's one of my good friends that I've known for ages, and I don't even really set him a brief. I just say, can you make me a film? And he just does something, and it's
love his work.
Yeah, he's just absolutely fantastic. And I think that I'm quite looking forward to, I mean, the thing is, when I was saying I've normalized this whole process, is because I'm not very, I don't want to dismiss the fear and everything that's going on, and how the gravitas of what's going on, but I do feel slightly content in the ability to be able to have a bit more time to think, and a bit more time to just make something that isn't like a show and sales orientated, and we've got to hit this mark, and we've got to get this at this price, and we've got to get this. It's like, no, I can actually just do, I could make a film. I could work with Jenkin to do something. I could work with, Gary, and do some illustrations together, and just have that part of the content of the brand. And
it's kind of slow fashion in a way as well, that, it's not bang, immediate, it has to be out, has to be up on the internet in 15 seconds. There's a sort of effective aesthetic element to this that I find really, I find appealing. I could see that something as sort of, that would be part of a reset.
I was saying to my my colleague Sam yesterday, because we were having a conversation about this call, and I was saying to him, I was like, I almost feel like I'm 17 again. Like, I feel like I'm in my mum's house, in my bedroom. I'm waking up at, and the same sort of time. I'm making 3 like meals for myself, or like feeling like I'm eating meals that my mum made, because I've learned how to cook for my mum. Making substantial meals. It reminds me when I was 17, because I used to go when I started exercising, like trying to go for runs around Cumbernauld in Scotland, and just doing that, and then kind of, dreaming and thinking, and doing all this makeup on myself and taking pictures of myself for my it's like I'm doing it for my MySpace page. But there's something in going back to that headspace which feels really healing. And it's like that idea of resetting and going back to a stage where I was so hopeful of the future. I'm not saying I'm not hopeful of the future. I'm so grateful to be where I am in my career. And my 17-year-old self would be like mind blown by where I'm at now, not to sound arrogant, but
say it.
But yeah, call a spade a spade. I've done well for myself, and I've done everything that I wanted to do when I was 17. But sometimes I think, I wonder what it would be like to be back in that space again, and just that, it was just that innocent dreaming of things, and exploring. I was watching all the old McQueen shows on the telly with my boyfriend the other night, and we were just getting so excited by it all, and just being like, it reminds me of like when I used to watch with my mum and be like, I'm going to St. George St. Martin's, Mum, I'm going to do this, and she would be crying like, oh, that's not all this kind of stuff. But my boyfriend's younger than me, and I'm studying to be a designer, and it's like feeling like we're watching this thing again and getting excited about fashion shows, like watching all the Guesquière shows for Balenciaga, and our favorite John shows, and just then dressing up and taking pictures of ourselves. I know it's a bit sort of what's the word? Well, it's not childish. I don't know.
Hardly. It's just it's paying the credit to things that deserve as much credit as you could possibly give them. Really, it's honoring some of the most inspiring impulses that fashion has had over the last 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think, what do I think? Keep talking and I'll decide what it was I think.
I was wanting to talk about this idea, so I know we spoke about it before, but you know, the sort of localized couture, and I was thinking a lot about students, just through I do teach from time to time, and a lot of my good friends were supposed to be graduating this year at Central St Martin's, and you know, it was a year where a lot of those kids used to come to Loverboy, and now they were graduating, so I felt like, oh my god, I'm getting old. But they, you know, I was thinking about the fact that they don't have that sort of a benchmark that they have to achieve now, with that idea of like, I need to get into the press show, I need to succeed, I need to do this show for the press show, and I need to get myself out there. It's like, no, because that's been taken away from them now, which is horrible. But at the same time, I'm like, I wonder if this is going to make them think about what they actually want from fashion, or what they actually want to do with themselves, instead of just being like the next big thing, like the next J-Dubs or the next Craig or the next Phoebe. You know, like, what do they want to just be really great at, like denim, or do they want to be really great at you know, draping, or do they want to be really great at sort of research or something else that's not just this idea of being the next best thing that is put on this press show pedestal? And you know, I was thinking about that idea
about the fact that there aren't going to be degree shows.
Yeah.
This year, yeah.
But maybe it's going back to skill, because I think that there's this, I don't know, like, you know, prod a lot of these institutions, but you know, this idea of skill is lost in education. You don't come out of education with a skill per se. Like, you know, people that aren't, you know, some people are self-taught, and that's the whole point of university. But like this idea of like apprenticeships and learning things, you know, I really pride my studio because I've got a really amazing studio manager called Naomi, and we work really closely together to make sure that our interns, so I like to see it more as like an apprenticeship. Like, they learn skills, they learn pattern cutting, they learn, you know, sewing, and they contribute to the show pieces. A lot of the show pieces that you see in the collection are, you know, are projects that I set the interns. And, you know, this whole idea of internships now has completely changed, but I still wanted my interns to have to contribute to the whatever we make when. So they've got this thing which I sent you pictures of. You sort of had a little sneak peek of these hope suits. They're all embroidered, and they've all got their own little packets. So I sent out these packets with like loads of little drawings and stuff, and then they've all got their fabrics. And you know, I've got a little WhatsApp group that I'm checking in with them, being like, how are you guys cracking on? You know, because they'll hopefully come away from it when we come back with all these like bits of embroidery that they've all contributed to them, you know, in their own way too, and we'll fashion those into something.
That's a bit like that, you know, the after World War One, you know, in that state of incredible despair that Europe was in, that Dada came out of, and they used to have that the Dada artists used to have that game called Exquisite Corpse, where they'd each do a bit of a drawing and fold it over, and then they'd send it on to the next person in the chain, and they'd do a bit of, and they'd have two little lines, and they'd draw their bit of the drawing, they'd fold it over, send it to the next artist, who'd do the little, and at the end, when they unfolded it and say, I don't know how many people had contributed to it, there'd be this, you know, big, some of them were big, some of them were small, but work of art made by all the top Dada artists.
Oh, I fucking love that. Oh, I love that.
Kind of like the hope suit that everybody makes a little bit of it, and then it's all put together and it becomes something else. But the game is called Exquisite Corpse.
I wrote that down.
Yeah, it's good. It's a really, and when you actually see them, and when you ever see them in an exhibition, or something, they do look like, you know, like if you had 6 friends and you all said, you each draw a bit, fold it down, give it to the next, they draw a bit and then fold it on, you know, pass it on. It does look a bit like that. It might be a skull at the top and high heels at the bottom or something, but it's good. It's an interesting collaborative, the randomness of collaboration, you know.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see. I mean, the only trouble is like some of these packages haven't even arrived because of the post being a lot smaller, the postal service. But you know, we've still been checking in. I've been sending them like pictures of each piece, and there's different stitches that they're going to you know, use to execute it. But you know, I'm again, like this idea of like sort of localized couture, or like, you know, this idea of like, how does one share knowledge or become really skilled at something on their own, you know, instead of having this sort of blanket way of making clothing, but it's like all of these, this one way of doing it. I'd be really interested to see, you know, if people reinvent ways of making clothing that isn't necessarily like digitally focused, like, oh, it's all about 3D printing. It's like, this is the Bradley Sharp method, which is like, you know, super glued and like stapled and then melted and then stitched or something.
You know, this is so interesting because you've talked about punk,
Mm-hmm.
a sort of a spirit of new punk, and tried, you know, in that show at the British Library, you had the punk soundtrack, and there was that sort of element there. Also, the idea of rebellion has been very important in your work, rebellion against the status quo. But this is something that would be good to see as well. You know, punk was such a crucible of creativity. It inspired so many kids in so many different ways to, you know, the whole idea of DIY, just spinning it off in so many music and fashion and art. It spun off in so many different ways. And I'm kind of waiting for that. I've been waiting for that now as a reaction to what's been happening politically and economically and socially in the world, but sort of wondering whether this practice might be the catalyst for that kind of, you know, so like you're talking about all these young designers in the fashion colleges who aren't going to get their graduate shows because of what's happening. You know, that this is you imagine this inspiring a change in consciousness, sensibility, you know, like the whole notion of a new punk spirit might come out of this.
I hope so. I just wonder how they're going to be able to share. I mean, I know everyone's got Instagram, but like that for me already feels reductive in a way to showcase themselves. And I would prefer if things became more sort of live. Like I'd love it if I just gazed out my window and there was a collection just ridden on bikes, just going through London, and then there's like a thing like, oh, keep your eye out at, like, you know, there's something of like at 8 o'clock when everyone claps for the NHS.
Oh, it was amazing last night.
I love that.
It was, I cried.
So
I had a huge tear just running down my face last night because you see all the kids in the windows, all the little kids.
banging the pots and things. Yeah. But there's something in that idea of just everything being like, it's that sort of human contact, even though we're from all further away. That's always going to inspire empathy and make people feel something. And I wonder, instead of having everything digitally focused, maybe there is some way of doing something physical or from afar, or there is something that's not necessarily about, I don't know, maybe it's, I don't know, I've got this idea of like people on bikes and then you're looking out your window and you see them all riding past. It's like the marathon. I mean, I know that's to do with contact, but I'm just thinking of using these as things that you can maybe break down. But I ran the marathon last year and it was the most amazing experience of my whole entire life because it was so human, and everybody for those whole 26.3 or 27.3 miles was just constant cheer because everyone was doing it for charity. People were doing it for charity, or it was just a big feat. And there was I never did sports. I never competed in sports, and there was something really human about that. And I really understood why people play sports. There was something about that, but I don't know where I'm going with this. But
I remember when you were talking about that, and you know, when people first discover exercise and they get a bit messianic about it, and especially for somebody like me who you know, heaving my belt from this chair to the chair next to me is a sort of physical effort. No, I'm kidding. I'm not that bad. But you know, it was really wonderful listening to you when you were talking about that, because it also had such an impact on what you did. It actually changed your creative process. And that was kind of fascinating. I am thinking about something here because we do have to finish. I know we were just. I was going to.
I was really enjoying this. Getting comfortable.
You know, when we were talking about the role of fashion, and then also this idea of community that's been so important for you, and I was just thinking about the designers who I love, you know, whose work I follow, and who bring in other elements. They bring in elements of you know, with the craft, they like architecture, home design, or opera, or movies, or arcane thought. I wanted, before we finish, you do have to tell me about Beltane,
Oh yeah.
And then I was thinking about this sort of shamanic aspect of fashion, that right now, if I think about you and Craig Green and Jonathan Anderson and Rick Owens, people who, you know, who make a tribe around themselves. And it kind of ties in with the idea of villaging, that this sort of new fashion feudalism. It's very ideal and maybe even naive, but it is a very appealing cinematic idea. And I know that you felt the cinematic quality of your last collection. And how do you, if I say that to you, do you think, oh God, that's just so much bullswool, you know, he's talking through a hole in his head again?
No, I mean, I think I was, when you mentioned Craig, I was just thinking about his debut in Paris, which I was honoured enough to see. And, you know, walking into that space felt so much like walking into some sort of like church or some sort of like spiritual place. And when those pieces came out, it was just, I was so blown away by it. I was like, I could even get emotional, like thinking about it. And just that, thinking about how powerful just that one moment can be given from a design that obviously I follow Craig's work, and I know a lot about it through reading all of the influences that he brings forth, but there's something that's just so personal about a fashion show that you can have. And, you know, it's this idea of like faith or something. You're going to something to sort of practice your faith towards it. And I don't know, like when I do my shows, like it's a different energy because I'm sort of putting it out there and there's all these things I have to think about. But I'd love to sort of like maybe kind of step into your brain or something to see how you feel it, or to feel how you feel, something like that. And I
think how complete it is really overwhelming. How complete, when you walk out of your show, when you walk out of Craig's, when you walk out of Rick's, when you walk out of Jonathan's, the vision is so complete. And it also isn't necessarily woven in with anything that's happening anywhere else. It's complete. It's got this sort of the power of idiosyncrasy, you know, the original vision, just so strong. And that's, I guess that's why I see that surviving more than something which is completely wired into, you know, the mainstream. You know, these things that can step out, that are already outside the mainstream, that exist in their own, they've created a universe and they exist in their own universe. So tell me about Beltane.
So basically, just off the topic of like paganism and Celtic sort of practices, and thinking about the last show, How Men Do, I looked into this festival called the Beltane festival, and it's the 1st of May. It's sort of like a May Day festival, and it's all kind of centralized around one big fire. And obviously, like the show that we did, we sacrificed someone to a tree, and I thought, God, I don't actually know of any festivals in Scotland outside of like The Wicker Man, which is a film, of like there being anything that was tied to human sacrifice. And Beltane Festival, I've got all these little notes here, was somewhere where people used to actually get sacrificed. And I often wonder, I mean, it's such a dark, you know, I don't know if I want to go there about what's going on now. No, it's... Yeah, I think. And
okay.
I don't know. There's something about that which it's. I don't know. Just thinking about this idea of going back to nature and going back to thinking about it and being mindful about it, and think about this idea of like, you know, Gaia and listening to her, because, you know, she has whispered something. It's about having to listen to her, and I wonder if this whole thing is going to make us all a bit sort of. I don't know. I wonder if it's going to make us more sort of like mindful and aware about how we're all sort of equal. I don't know, that I think that there's something in these ideas of, I mean, I'm sitting here next to bloody crystals. There's something about these like apotropaic items which make you think about things and they make you connect into things. I don't know, and I think there's something about, you know, this idea of like paganism and Celtic sort of practices which make you sort of think about connecting back to nature or connecting to people or something. I don't know, I think that's something about that which I really like.
Well, when you're confronted by the fact that we are diligently eradicating life forms that have been on the face of the planet for 450 million years, you know, there is there needs to be a perspective on things like that. So obviously, if we get reminded that we are part of a continuum, we don't stand outside nature, we are part of nature, then obviously that's a very valuable thing to take away from this terrible time. You were going to change hats, but you didn't.
Oh shit, I did not. I guess I could end with a bit of a tartan.
Yeah. Take us home with a hat.
There we go. We've got a little bit of like frayed Loverboy tartan.
Very good.
It's actually based off an old Chanel hat, believe it or not, Coco Chanel.
What goes around comes around.
Totally.
Thank you, Charles. It was wonderful talking to you. And
you too.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. And I hope we see each other again really soon.
Oh yeah, me too.
Okay.
Give my love to Jeff.
I will. And love to you and yours.
Thank you very much. Bye, Tim.
Bye.
Thank you.